couch. I'm so happy to be back on Hive Live. I'm in Melbourne, Australia, and it's just really great to be back, first of all. Been missing the interviews, and I feel like we have a really special interview today. It just so happens that I'm in Melbourne right now, working with a somatic experiencing crew here in Australia, and so thanks to amazing colleague Kate Werning and Claudia Horowitz for connecting me with Holly Hammond, who is doing has been doing some phenomenal work down here with activist education, wellness, and to prevent burnout and to create thriving activist communities. And I'm just like, these are just huge these are just huge intersections that are in my heart. So I'm just like really excited to be here. Thank you for having me at your home. Welcome to Hive Live. Thank you.
Welcome to Australia. It looks like you've had a pretty full-on couple of weeks already.
Yeah, totally have had a full-on couple of weeks. It's every day is an adventure here.
Awesome.
Yeah,
hey,
absolutely.
Shout out to Kate and Claudia. Yeah, good to be connected.
Yeah, I'm gonna have you speak up a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah. Totally. So, thanks for coming back. Good to see you guys. Where we start is we just ask you to just share a little bit about give us a little bit of background about who you are before we get into what you do.
Sure.
Great.
So my name's Holly Hammond. I'm an activist educator based here in Melbourne, Australia. I was born in London in the mid-1970s, and I grew up in Western Australia, home to many beautiful beaches that you have sampled, and then travelled to the East Coast, lived in Canberra for a few years, our beautiful bush capital, and been here in Melbourne for about 6 years.
Tell us just a little bit about Melbourne and I don't know.
Well, it's a pretty great city. It's probably the second largest city in Australia. It has a very strong activist community, progressive community, and that's actually the reason why I chose it as my home, because it fits in with my work to be in a place where there are many activists and many people kind of engaged in social movement work. Awesome.
And that is pretty much what we're going to be talking about today. Activists engage in social movement work, and your particular spin on it, which would you say in a nutshell is?
Ooh, well, I've got a couple of different threads to the work that I do.
Why don't we start there, and then we'll go into each of them.
Sure.
Great.
So I have two projects. One's called Plan to Win, which is about providing training, facilitation, and one-to-one mentoring for activists, basically in a whole range of different skills that are needed to win change in the world. So I'll work around campaign strategy, community organising, coalition building, working well in groups, setting up things, doing comms, all the different kind of things that we need to be skilled up in order to make change. But also facilitating groups to get clearer on where they're heading and how they're going to work together. Alongside Plan to Win, I have another project called Plan to Thrive that I work on with Suze Sholem and Laura Gilmartin, and that is all about activist health and wellbeing. So we don't just want to win, we want to thrive while we do the work to change the world. So that's a collaborative blog that publishes the writing from many different people, and we have some international content there, interviews, articles, a whole bunch of different resources focused on living well while we work to change the world.
Fantastic. So you put the word activist next to the word thrive.
Yes.
Right?
It's possible.
It's possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're like kind of bringing this message, you're bringing this consciousness, you're bringing this skills into communities.
Yes. So we also run workshops. We're doing monthly short wellbeing workshops this year in a whole range of different areas to really kind of hold out that there's lots of tools that we can have in our toolbox to live well, and a whole bunch of different people who are happy to kind of support activists to figure that out. So monthly short wellbeing sessions, and next weekend we're doing a retreat as well, so a weekend away that's going to be very lush and nurturing. But yeah, so we want to thrive. The kind of world that we want to create is one where people get to be their whole selves and are loved and supported and connected, and just have access to a good life. So we can look at how to make that happen
Mm-hmm.
sooner rather than later, recognising that we'd all probably be in heaps better shape if we could transform the world, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but we can't wait for that to happen as well. So.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk a little bit more about all of that. But before we do, I want to just dial back just a second and just sort of like maybe tell us a little bit about one story about how you came to the work, kind of like how, I mean, there's a very particular quality of work to sort of be bringing into the world, and it's kind of a bridge type of work, you know, where you're sort of bringing consciousness around health and wellness and well-being to communities that are often, that is not their focus. So if you could just like tell us how you came to it, that'd be great.
Sure, there's a couple of parts to that really. So one is, well, I've been an activist since the early 90s, so since high school, got involved in, you know, working for economic justice, protecting old growth forests, you know, queer rights, women's liberation, a whole range of different activism from that, you know, time. And I think in some ways just even having a long life as an activist, we often have a lot of churn. We have people who come in for a little while and hit a wall and drop out and then maybe come back many years later. But kind of a continuity of engagement is a harder thing for people to sustain. So in some ways I feel like even just doing the work that I do with people and being able to talk about things that happened in the early 90s, you know, within my experience is like quite a gift to be able to share. So I really love that. But about 12 years ago, I was in a little bit of a lull in my working life. I've been working in the community sector. Kind of that seemed the best fit for me to be working in line with my values. So I did a lot of different kinds of roles in the community sector. But was in a bit of a lull and was kind of wondering where to go from here, and was re-engaging with different kinds of activism. And I was actually just really struck about the need for like quality training, quality facilitation, and realising that I built up a number of skills that were lacking in social movements. And I actually had an epiphany. I had a really powerful experience of connecting with my life's purpose. So, you know, a transformative moment where I was like, that's what I'm going to do. My life's work is supporting social movements. I'm going to figure out how to set that up in my life.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
You literally had an epiphany.
Yeah,
like
epiphanies are great.
Yeah, they are great.
Yeah.
And were you, and you were available for it?
Yeah.
At the time, because you were sort of in a lull and you were...
I'd made some space, I guess, to be open to different opportunities.
Yeah.
And I kind of I was actually reading about George Lakey, who was the founder of Training for Change, reading an interview with him where he was talking about his work, and I just really struck by, but that's what I always wanted to do, and I just didn't realise it was actually a role that you could play, you know, that people did that as their you know, central focus to do that. And it was transformational. The light changed. I cried, and I went home, you know, really purposeful, told my partner, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to, you know, set my life up to do this work. You know, let's go on a journey together on that. So that happened.
So you went home, you said, I want to set my life up to do this work. And then you took the first step and then the second step.
Yeah, multiple steps. So,
yeah. And then it did open up, obviously, because you're still doing it.
Yes, and I'm here today working full-time, training and facilitating and mentoring, and writing and doing all this other work in support of social movements and engaging with a whole range of amazing individuals and organisations and campaigns.
That's so cool. 12 years later, after your epiphany.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds like you've really, like, the vision just continues to evolve, and you're doing your life's purpose.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's sort of like obvious, but I slow it down there because I think there's a lot of people are trying to figure out how to do that. Yeah,
it's significant.
You know?
And it gives me like a compass point. You know, I know where I'm heading.
Yeah.
I don't need to stop and second guess myself. I can kind of back myself to do this because it all feels very clear for me. Which doesn't mean I don't have struggles, you know, and I don't kind of adjust as I go along. But, you know, I think that having that clarity, it has really sustained me. Yeah. But one of the first things I did after I got clear around that one of the first workshops that I offered was around sustaining activism. So it was an area that I was just very aware of, that there was a need for people to reflect and get new insights and get skills to prevent burnout and to set things up differently for a longevity in activism.
Right, and you're still teaching about that. You just maybe you're saying it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
But it was sustainability and activism. Can we just kind of dive into that a little bit about, like, what are some of the pieces that you taught then or that are still relevant about, how do you frame that, right?
Yeah.
Talking to people who are really busy, that maybe it's not on their radar, or, a lot of times the belief is that you can't have both because either it's like about privilege or it's about
yeah. So I think often with activists there's a real resistance to prioritise their own needs, our own needs. And it's kind of unfortunate, but I have at different times kind of used the fact that it makes people more effective in their social change work as kind of leverage to get them over that resistance.
Okay,
so,
can we talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, do you have a particular question about
I sure
it?
do. Well, so you say you use this idea of that wellness. Is that the word?
Yeah, well-being.
Well-being, right?
Yeah.
Well-being makes you more effective.
Yes.
Right. So just break down that translation for a second. I mean, I know it's kind of obvious, but I don't think it's totally obvious.
Yeah, sure. Sure. So, so we have a story in our society that working really hard and kind of in a really driven way is how we're productive. But actually, what is effective is when we're able to show up as our whole selves and be really present in our work and be, I think especially in activism, so much of it is about relationships. We need to be able to think well about each other, communicate clearly. We also need to be resilient to setbacks because there are constant setbacks.
Right.
We're under all sorts of different attacks, or the people that we're working with, or the environment is. So we need emotional strength to kind of weather the storm. We need strong relationships. Oftentimes those break down under the stress of activism as well. We need to not just be getting sick all the time.
Right.
All of those things, get in the way. And I've seen people hit a wall, burn out, drop out of their organisation very quickly, and all the stuff they've figured out, all the connections that they've had, all the skills that they have kind of get lost in that process. So, we need to set things up to stop that really, sudden loss of people, but also because those are humans who are hurt in that process, and we can be showing care to ourselves and to each other.
I just feel like you just spoke to that so eloquently, and so many pieces within the life of an activist, from emotional health to relational health to physical health, as far as sort of burn brightly and then out. And I loved how you talked about emotional resilience with how many, I like that. I mean, I like all the pieces you talked about, but that one, I think, talk about setbacks, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's so relevant right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always relevant, but...
Yeah, and our emotional state's connected to our thinking, our intelligence. So if we are looking really hard at something massively challenging, the distress that we feel in that can mean that we aren't thinking clearly about our strategy. We're reacting, we're on the run, we're kind of acting in a desperate way.
Right.
So the better our emotional health, the more I think we're able to kind of keep that clarity that we need, also to make good decisions and set good direction.
It's so exciting, right, to just have you talk about this and to talk about it so clearly. Obviously, you've thought a lot about it and you're teaching a lot about it,
Yeah.
How does that land with people? Activists, generally. What's kind of what's the gist of how it is? I don't know. How do you talk about it in a way that what do you notice is effective in being able to talk about it like that?
Sure. Well, I think connecting around what we care deeply about.
Yeah.
So that we're wanting a better world. We're wanting the outcomes in the areas that we're working. And that is really important, because I think there's a way in which we can there's a wellbeing industry that focuses a lot on kind of individual lifestyle changes, and those can be really useful and effective, but there's a collective project that we're engaged in. So I think I feel like when I'm working with activists, I'm always kind of mindful of that bigger picture, and it's not just like, look after yourself, it kind of is connected to the broader struggle as well. So that's part of it.
Yeah, that's great.
But I think, there's a mix of responses. There's a way in which people are really hungry for acknowledgement of the struggle and of kind of compassion and nurturing and thoughtfulness around this stuff. But sometimes also, it's hard for people to hear or take on, because like stopping feels like giving up on something they feel they've committed to. All those feelings people might have of guilt, or that they're being self-indulgent, or just pausing might mean that a whole lot of feelings come up that have been sort of marginalised or suppressed. So if I slow down, I might feel how bad I feel about this situation. So that's a big challenge.
That is a big challenge, and it makes me think of some of the somatic work that I do with people around sort of habits and protective habits, or sort of strategic survival habits, which are sometimes very much operating within a sort of feeling of life or death with activism, because it often is that, or it is that for some people, which is why we're feeling so passionate about it. And it just makes me think of that. One of the tools that we use a lot is like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? Like, why don't you just try on 5% of well-being? Like, what would 5% more of well-being look like? Versus feeling like it's 100 and then all of a sudden you lose your shit and you're like, your light burns out because you're flooded with feelings. Like we often use like, well, just try a couple percent, right? And there's almost like a challenge to doing that, because usually it's like, it kind of often feels like it has to be all or nothing.
But just some small modifications could make life more enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a friend who I've done coaching sessions with, and my biggest intervention was to ask him if he'd been eating breakfast. And I think that was the most transformational thing I could have asked him, actually.
That's so great. Right, it's simple. I mean, it isn't.
It wasn't a huge transformation, but it made him more effective.
Totally.
Could think better in the morning. He wasn't getting cranky.
Yeah. I love that question of like, what's one or two things you can do that will make you more effective? Like that'll increase your well-being, which will in turn make you more effective.
I mean, it's an interesting kind of challenge. So I was kind of conscious that part of that is sort of leveraging people over resistance by using the thing that they care about, So, this will make you a better activist. But one of our articles on Plan to Thrive, Liz Scarf, who we're both going to experience her training tomorrow, kind of wrote about how that's actually pretty oppressive to sort of say, do self-care so you're better at this, it's kind of, it fits back into that productivity story in our society, rather than being, like she talks about, that self-care is actually about making space for suffering and for caring for yourself where you're suffering. So,
Right. So it is unto itself.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think part of it is I might use that, hey, it's going to make you a better activist, but the other side of it is like, but also because you're just, great. Right. Because you're just great. And so some people, can't hear this one. This will work better for them. But
might get you in the door.
Yeah, but it's kind of, opens the door and then you
I
can
appreciate
bring the love in.
Right. And then some momentum gathers and you're like, oh, it feels pretty good. And then, I appreciate though that real clarity around the why it's important and, what the framework is. Great. So you have a retreat coming up. A retreat for, tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So it's a weekend away and we're doing it at the Rockland Yoga Ashram in Daylesford. And it's going to be a mix of some yoga, some walking in the forest, some sessions that are sort of time for reflection on different challenges around activist wellbeing and some planning, things that people might want to do differently.
Nice.
Co-presenting with Steph Gesling, who has a project called Rest and Play, very appropriately named, using interplay approaches. So also a bit of a chance for us to get in our bodies and kind of loosen up. So, it's very nurturing. It's kind of a time where, someone else is going to be creating beautiful, healthy food for us to eat, and it's a lovely environment to just kind of be in and enjoy. And the idea for the retreat came from, I did a research trip last year to Europe. So I did 2 retreats over there. So one was called Sustaining Our Activism, which was a week-long activist-only retreat, which was amazing. And the second one was a mindfulness in transition. So it was a combination of mindfulness and transition, and the lessons that have come out of the Transition Towns movement. So they've done a lot of great work on, we want to create this big change in society. What do we need to change within ourselves? So having the experience of those 2 retreats, it was so refreshing and grounding for me. I was really I want to bring this experience to other people, and this is just a bit of a first try, a bit of an experiment to sort of see how we go.
That's great. So it's a first. So it's a first for you here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Plan to Thrive is putting it on.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's kind of a co-badged Plan to Win, Plan to Thrive event. So, but always really keen to connect with other people who are sort of working at this intersection of personal development or well-being or healing and social change. Activism. People who are kind of thinking about that interaction. Really put a call out to any Australians who connect with this video to get in touch if you'd like to host a retreat in the place where you're at, or a similar kind of workshop series to what we're doing here in Melbourne. We're really happy to kind of share a lot of resources and connections to help make that happen.
That's fantastic. That's great. Yeah, it would be so wonderful to see it, to continue to sort of fractal out. Great. So talk a little bit about maybe what's hard for people. I want to talk about specifics about Plan to Thrive, and what are some of the things that you really encourage. If we're going to talk to folks out there who are activists, or people who are maybe healers who want to bring healing to activists, I don't know, what are some lessons you've learned? Or
Sure. Well, I wrote an article called How to Build a Support Network, and then after that I was like, well, actually people need to know how to support activists. So I wrote an article about, here's my tips based on the support work I've done with activists around how to support activists. Some of the things that I emphasise in there is respect for the path that people have chosen. So some people might come up against an activist who's very urgent and very driven, and kind of being like, why don't you just get a more chilled out job? Which is not what an activist needs to hear. They actually kind of need acknowledgement that what they're doing is valid. There's so much societal pressure against us that says that's not a valid choice. So
totally,
we need practitioners who get it.
Nice. Great.
Yeah.
Great. So respect.
Yeah, respect. I think lightness. So a lot of what activists are up against is really heavy. You're dealing with the climate crisis, or you're dealing with the destruction of communities. It's heavy. So I think figuring out how to bring some lightness into that. Whether it's humour or just kind of gentleness. Warmth and compassion. Including recognising that some activists are not into the warm and fuzzy.
No doubt.
But if you're kind of thoughtful about that, there are still ways to kind of convey it in ways that people can hear it. So, and a bunch of other tips. So check it out on the blog.
On the blog.
.net.au.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say it one more time.
plantothrive.net.au. Yeah. But I also just wanted to say, we can really focus on the struggle part, and that activism, leads to burnout, and it's really hard on people. And, there are a bunch of impacts that people do experience that are negative, but there's also a heap of really positive impacts. So a couple of years ago, with my Plan to Thrive colleague at the time, Helen Cox, we did a survey with about 200 activists to ask them about their experiences of activism and burnout. And we asked them what positive impacts had activism had on their health and well-being.
Nice.
And people just named a whole bunch of stuff, in terms of how it had connected them with other people, how it had given them a sense of purpose, how it, gave them ability to impact things that they were really concerned about, but also how it meant that they were healthier. They got more conscious about the food they were eating because they were working in the area of food sovereignty, or these different kinds of ripple effects from people's activism. So I think for myself, I think it's the best choice I could have made. So I named my epiphany from 12 years ago, but really that turning point when I was 15, when I said, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to get politically active, that was a good choice for me. Right? That brought me into communities of resistance with other people, gave me like an analysis of the stuff that was coming at me as a young queer woman. It's been incredibly empowering. Yeah.
I love that. I love that sort of, again, the frame that just puts like all of the health that can be created by being an activist. All the connectivity, the consciousness, the other word I hear is like agency.
Yeah,
it generates a sense of agency of like you have some control over your world. You're, creating change. It's all good. And really being able to honor that and honor the capacity of that it's not just, it doesn't just suck the life out of you.
No, not at all.
It just, there's so much there that it's giving.
Yeah, and if it's getting to that point, there's something to be done about it, for some people that they have had those kinds of like harsh experiences. But yeah, it doesn't have to be that way.
What's a conversation that you and your Suze and your other Laura, right, who I got a chance to have lunch with the other day, which was awesome. What's a conversation you all are having right now, or even that you're having with yourself, that you are like you find kind of compelling?
I think,
or like really compelling.
Yeah,
actually.
I think for myself, I kind of feel like I'm trying to grapple all the time with what the ultimate answer is, and of course there isn't one, but sometimes it's a good quest. So one of the sessions I'm going to present at the retreat is 8 elements of wellbeing. It's kind of like, Holly's latest grand theory of activist wellbeing and like the different parts that contribute to us living well. So
you're going to throw a couple of them down?
Well, I have some visual aids, actually.
Oh, let's bring it out.
Yeah, I don't know if we want the whole 8. Like, depends on our time.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens.
It's story time first.
Yes, this is fantastic.
So, I mean, one of the things I kind of think about that's an element of activist wellbeing that you're never going to hear from, like, out there in the world, really, hardly at all, is that having an understanding, you won't even be able to read that, of society, of power dynamics and social change dynamics, power relationships, like actually understanding how the world works and why things are the way they are is part of well-being. Because, when we're up against these forces and we can't make sense of them, that, confuses us, sets us sometimes on paths that are ineffective, so we work really hard to change things in ways that won't work.
Right.
And there's actually thinking about, like, there's stages in social movements where people are more prone to burnout, where they feel more despair. Bill Moyers came up with the movement action plan, where he talks about these stages of social movements, and in stage 5, it's really typical for people to feel like they're failing when actually the movement is just on the cusp of winning.
Wow.
So having that kind of framework and analysis, I think, can really help sustain us for the longer haul.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Understanding.
So just one of the elements there.
All right, well, let's do...
We got time for a couple more?
Let's do a couple more.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe like 2 more, but if you're like,
I was just kind of thinking one of my favourite ones I want to
Yeah,
name.
exactly. That would be great.
Yeah. So, I think I'll talk a little bit about, freedom from past distress, oppressive messages, and limiting beliefs.
Okay.
So it probably relates a little bit to the work that you do, which is like that you recognise that what goes on for people happens in a social context. But I don't know that many activists, when they're looking around for support services or healing practitioners, kind of bump into people who have the consciousness around oppression,
right.
And how that actually hurts people.
Right.
So, those dynamics that we're up against, that we're trying to change in the world, have also impacted on us and kind of through the lives that we've lived. So how we kind of get free of that stuff can really make a big difference to how well we live in the present time. So,
absolutely. Yeah. And what type of Do you feel like that's happening in activist communities? Like, what are some of the, like, what's one way that you feel really excited that people are undoing their own internalized oppression?
Yeah, so I'm actually working last year and this year on a women's leadership program in the environment movement. So it's a women's only program where we do retreats and mentoring and projects together, and just noticing what it's like when you bring a group of women together and they start to recognise that a lot of what they've been experiencing is not an individual struggle, it's actually a systemic issue that they're up against, and like, this is how sexism and male domination has impacted my life. And here's a collective response opportunity, you know, rather than it just being down to me to figure out how to make this work better. I actually have other women who I can strategize with, we can figure things out, and we can go forth with some action to address it. So I see that as super inspiring.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but also I think any times when constituencies organise together, there's often that flow-on of challenging the internalised oppression. So we've seen amazing work in Australia with the SEED Indigenous Network of climate activists, and also just a new project called Democracy in Colour, which is people of colour organising. And I think that those will have flow-ons to how people challenge the internalised oppression.
Great. So what was the second one you said?
Democracy in Colour.
Democracy in Colour. And what is that? What's that project?
It's a new project started by a guy called Tim Licerdo, and it's going to be amplifying the voices of people of colour. So oftentimes in Australia we've had campaigns on issues that affect communities of colour that are, there's white spokespeople and people, you know, there's not a lot of you know, acknowledged leadership from the people most affected. So it's going to do a lot of work to train people up and skill them up and give them a platform. And it's going to pick out different campaigns to work on, and it's also going to do rapid response to, you know, racist stuff that pops up.
Fantastic.
You know, which is happening more and more as we swing to the right.
That's right. Because you're swinging to the right here too.
It's a little bit of a global trend.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So there's things popping up to resist even more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Address even more.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think, you know, I think we can't talk enough about that. Well, maybe part of it because I'm so passionate about it, but that piece around how can we together help each other undo, you know, realize that it's not personal, right? Sexism, homophobia, racism, my racism, it's just like not personal, it's learned. And how do we create conditions and environments to...
and it isn't necessarily learnt in the way that we think of learning. You know, it's actually hurts that are laid in on people that, you know, it's not kind of like, here's information. It's more like... Really good point. Yeah. You know, it's a really different way to use learned. It's kind of done to people, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, so we've got to figure out how to get that off each other and how to challenge it.
All right, so that was your second one you shared.
That was my second.
One more?
Well, I'm going to do a really quick double.
Oh, great.
Which they're kind of... One is rest and recovery. Yeah. And I especially talk with activists about, it doesn't, like, thinking about your well-being doesn't mean you have to slow your pace down the whole time. You can still have high-intensity campaigns. That's always going to be part of the story. But you can recover afterwards. So last year we had a federal election and we scheduled just a short session, or like a week later, called an election recovery session, just to signal, hey, you did a thing, now you get to have a little bit of a break. And of course, like, a couple of hours wasn't the recovery that everyone needed, but it was just trying to, again, kind of wedge open that door a little bit to communicate that recovery is important. And joy and pleasure.
All right.
Yeah. So, you know, there's
Do you want to just say anything about that, though? Joy and pleasure? I mean, I know they sort of speak for themselves.
Speaks for itself, but I think we can create very stoic cultures. Like, I think often activist cultures are kind of like the Protestant work ethic gone mad, where it's just like, it's all the work. And you might have occasional wins, but you just keep going and you don't look back because we don't have time to do that. So, you know, figuring out how we actually get to celebrate and... you know, just be joyful and silly and have that in our lives outside of our activism in different ways as well. Right. And pleasure, you know, I think, you know, everyone needs it. It's a very human kind of thing. There's a great report written by a bunch of women human rights defenders who'd done a whole project looking at sort of self-care for women in those roles. And they really named pleasure as really key. So, you know, just even getting to eat something really delicious, or, feel good in your body in some way as a counter to that hardship.
Yeah. I think it would be really interesting to have more, well, they are happening, of course, conversations about, right, I don't even know I'd love to just hear what you think about it. Sometimes when you I think about like joy, and people post on Facebook, or people do amazing things, or they, or they take rest or whatever, and there can be a pretty strong sometimes like cut down on that, right? Like, oh, that person gets to do that and I don't, and I've been on both sides of that, right? Like of kind of like you kind of can't joy and pleasure and rest and recovery. Like you kind of like sometimes I kind of like I can't do that because I'm gonna be judged.
Yeah. So I think it's an interesting time that we're living into around our awareness around oppression and privilege has also made people cautious around things. But like joy and pleasure is for everybody, you know. And so like just because other people have less than you have doesn't mean you've got to somehow like not have joy and pleasure. I just wonder if there's some of the policing of activists that goes on, there's some consciousness in there that is making it trickier to kind of show, hey, I'm just having a light time right now and I'm not weighed down by the world. It's like, no, somehow, like, because, there is differentiation in terms of how much that struggle hits different people, like whether it's that starts to kind of silence that diversity of people's lives. Which is like, hey, this is the time when I'm just clocked off having a good time with my friends. So it kind of can feed into the Stoic story of activism as well. I like, even though it's kind of simple and clear, it's like everybody can have that, and how do we hold privilege in that conversation? But it doesn't change that everybody gets to have that. Right? Cool. I'm loving some of the ongoing conversation I'm seeing from sort of organizers and leaders sort of talking about this right now. So and it looked like with the Black Lives Matter movement becoming so strong in the US, that there was also this great ripple effect around healers in communities of colour, that they were figuring a whole bunch of stuff out about nurturing that movement, which is really powerful, and also quite inspiring to see what happened after Trump was elected, how with Citizen Well that you mentioned before, that Kate Werning works for, that networking a whole bunch of different healers and wellbeing practitioners to resource those movements, so putting on different events where people got to really feel their grief or their exhaustion and be held in that. It's really powerful.
It's so powerful, and it's nice to watch that consciousness trickle more and more into places of wellness, yoga studios where there are lots of people to start to bring those lenses in. And interesting conversations that people are having around cultural appropriation and yoga and how that relates. It's an interesting, like, politicized time, and and it brings a whole bunch of different stuff with it. That's right. Stuff that I'm looking forward to talking about more in this ongoing series. So thank you for your hopefully that's going to be a book.
I think it's going to have to turn into it might be an evolving kind of manifesto of some kind.
Yeah, for sure. Well, whatever you do, right? You share it. You write a blog. You write your thing. We'd love to sort of share that as a follow-up. Just to get that out there, because I think they're really helpful. Those pieces and what you know and how you know it, and I think people resonate with these things. And then kind of find their own path to what that looks like for them. But there is some of it is about permission. Some of it is about I've never thought about that I could do this too, right? So it's so important and exciting, kind of what you're naming, the wisdom that Plan to Thrive in particular is holding down, I think, right now. Well,
I mentioned before how hearing about George Leahy had opened up this whole path for me, and I think in some ways kind of making Plan to Thrive visible as a project is there to be a reminder to people that you can prioritise it. Look, those folks are and they're still really committed to the struggle, you know. We did a crowdfunding project to support the workshops that we were doing, but even just sending that out felt like a reminder to activists, like, you know, even those emails, hey, people are trying to plan ways to support you, you know, that is part of expressing that love and compassion to activists. And even when we put on a workshop and we're telling people about it, that they might, even if they don't make it along, that sense that there is something that's going on there, I think is a good thing to share.
Yeah, I do too. I think it sort of like contributes to this, even if it's invisible, this sort of weaving in that, I don't know, that I feel like we're all cultivating to help hold each other and to hold the journey to liberation.
Yeah.
You know, and the more we weave, however invisible the threads are on most days, like they're there and they're vibrating, you know, and the more that we help amplify, you know, sometimes visibilize, sometimes invisible is just the right way to do it, you know.
Yeah, but it's a cultural change project.
That's right.
And I was very inspired when I did my research trip in Europe, because I connected with Ecodharma, that run a retreat centre in the Catalan Pyrenees, and they run like 10-day or 2-week-long sustaining resistance courses that activists from all over Europe go to, and they've been doing that for 6 years, and it's starting to change the culture of the movements that those people are going back to. So in terms of how much it's supporting and skilling people, and then the ripples that come from that, so that was super inspiring for me to think, okay, you can actually, by doing it, you can start to see the change over time.
That's not bad for 6 years.
I know.
I mean, that's incredible.
It's pretty high impact.
So that's Ecodharma.
Yeah. So they're bringing together Buddhism, deep ecology, with a social justice lens.
Great. I'm sure some folks will want to check that out. Awesome. So we're just about to wrap up. Anything that you haven't said that you really want to say? Any other last piece that feels like wants to be expressed?
I think I'm just really appreciative of kind of having this international community of practice. You know, we talked a little bit about that sort of intersection point, and finding those folks who are excited about that, and to know that there are people around the world, and that you are, you know, it's the Hive directory, but you are buzzing around like a bumblebee, you know, cross-fertilizing and connecting, and super appreciative of you for doing that.
Absolutely. Well, I just feel like it's part of my purpose. It's part of my ongoing epiphany, right? Like, you know, there does feel like an ongoing nature to just waking up and being like, what's the most, just like, what can I do that's going to be really contribute, like that's obviously connecting with my fire, and I have all these skills, right? I mean, I'm 43 years old, and it's like, how can I use them to the best, just to the best impact on the planet, you know? And I try to ask that every day, and it shifts and flows. So I'm really excited. I love the interview project. I'm gonna, just so folks know, I'm gonna keep doing it, and I get a chance to travel with the somatic work I'm doing, so we'll just continue to see who I interview. Speaking of that, I'm actually gonna be interviewing an old friend of mine next week in, where am I going?
Brisbane?
No, I'm going to Brisbane, but then I go south. Anyways,
Northern Rivers,
and then there's like another town in there, but I can't remember what it is. Anyways, my old friend and colleague from 20 years ago, Ruth Rosenhecht, do you know her?
I don't know her directly, but I know of her.
Oh, that's
deep
great.
Ecology.
That's right, deep ecology.
Work that reconnects.
That's right, exactly. So I'm really excited. I'm going to go, I haven't seen her for a million years, and we're going to go spend some time wherever that is, in the beautiful inland, I think a bit more, of Australia. So looking forward to that.
Go well.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much for your time and your work, and the retreats, caring for people.
Thanks, Sage. Awesome conversation.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Take good care, y'all. We'll see you next time. See you next week sometime. I'm sure I'll post about it. Be well. Bye.